Hours to go before a shutdown, Democrats are holding firm on health care, Republicans on spending, and both sides are betting the other will take the blame. Beyond the politics, past shutdowns have stalled food inspections, canceled immigration hearings, and furloughed tens of thousands of workers. Jess, who do you think is actually going to bear the brunt of the blame if the government shuts down? And let me just say, it appears that there's about 10 times the energy going into trying to blame the other side than actually trying to come to any sort of deal here. Who do you think wins and loses here?
Well, the American people lose, but that's just a regular day in Washington, I feel like. And hi, everyone. This video is just a preview of the full episode, which you can tell because it's short. And that's available now on our Raging Moderates YouTube feed. It's been so fun seeing a lot of you over there. We're having a great time creating the content, these up-to-the-minute videos, reaction takes. Scott's even enjoying himself. And this is, of course, in addition to the Wednesday and Friday pods. You can click the pop-up link, which should be on your screen, or head over to youtube.com/@RagingModerates to subscribe. Please do. That's why you have such negative approval ratings of Congress and Senate and everyone in D.C. across the board. The polls show that the Republicans will be blamed by a 13-point margin overall. And if you just look at independents, that margin is 17 points, which is pretty sizable. And that's how it should be. The Republicans control everything. And, you know, their best attempt at negotiating has led to a comment. What did Trump say? On second thought, go fuck yourself. That's what a White House official relayed back out to the press. And then, you know, we had the meeting that took place on Monday, which was followed up by a racist AI video that Trump tweeted out. So, you know, I think that the framing of this is of one party that is interested in having a negotiation, which is how these spending bills are supposed to be done. That's how it is always done, at least when it's successful. And another party that, frankly, just wants to lie about what the Democrats are asking for. And it gets exhausting having to get into the weeds for these fact checks constantly. You know, we're talking about sex changes in Peru again. And, you know, they want to conflate as well things that were in the big, beautiful bill, which has a -29 approval rating, and what's in the spending bill. But the crux of it is the extension of the ACA tax credits. And those premiums could be jacked up by up to 75%. And the right wants to make it out like this is just going to be a Democrats' problem. That is not true. But plenty of Republicans are on the Affordable Care Act or have Obamacare, and they're not going to be happy when they see their premiums going up too. So big loser Americans that we have such dysfunctional government, but politically speaking, the Republicans will be blamed. What are your hot takes?
So traditionally, the American public does not feel that negotiating government policies and spending should be done vis-a-vis shutdowns or threats of shutdown. They're like, that's not where we make these decisions, right? And the last two shutdowns that were averted were basically because the Republicans tried to hold the government hostage for funding for the wall and for a reduction in Obamacare. And neither worked, and they ended up blinking. So traditionally, it's a losing prospect to shut the government down in exchange asking for a change in policy. Americans don't think that's how you negotiate policy. Having said that, I think it might be different this time. And the Democrats are being shockingly strategic here. And that is, they're not saying get rid of the tariff nonsense. They're not saying we want more input into when you run military missions. We want you to stop rounding up gardeners and housekeepers. They're going after a very divisive issue amongst Republicans and a very unpopular issue in that you mentioned the tax credits for Obamacare. So they're being very pointed. They're, I think, being very disciplined here. And I think they actually, and to your point, it looks like they will come out of this the winners. Also, I'm a big fan of the shutdown. I think that we just look so weak. It's like Leader Jeffries and Senator Schumer, wet meat blanket. I think instead of just clutching our pearls all the time, we need to go a little bit gangster and say we're no longer going to fund a government that is essentially descending into fascism. This deal to carve up TikTok, the government's funding black sites to incarcerate who appear to be American citizens. We are going to remember this. And to the letter of the law, we're not going to engage in retribution, but once we have a real DOJ again, we are going to remember what's going to happen. We're going to unwind the TikTok deal being carved up and handed out to your Republican donors at an 80% discount. We are going to remember who supported these black sites. We are going to remember who decided to, pull the security detail of former generals. It reminds me there was actually a fairly robust, non-violent resistance movement in Northern Europe. That when the Nazis rolled into Northern Europe and different countries, there was a tangible movement to say non-violent resistance. And okay, sure, you're so noble. Now come over here and please get on this train. I am sick of clutching our pearls. And so I absolutely think we should shut down the government. I think the Democrats are being smart here. One issue, we want to restore tax credits for Obamacare, which is hugely popular. And by the way, affects more poor Republicans in red states who are much more dependent on government handouts than blue states. So I actually like our odds here, Jess. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you. I have some nitpicking to do with messaging quality, not necessarily the substance of it, but to your point about going a little bit more gangster. Like I was watching Hakeem Jeffries was on Squawk Box this morning. We're recording this on Tuesday, and Becky Quick asked him about, aren't you just trying to preserve funding for illegals, healthcare funding for illegals? And he explained that's illegal, which it is, and Medicaid doesn't do that. And this is what the right wants you to believe about it. But I'm kind of for pushback that looks like you and I both know that that's a lie. Don't waste my time with something that's a lie. We have real work here to do, right? Millions of Americans are going to lose their Medicaid coverage. Your premiums are going to go up 75%. And I think showing that you could throw some elbows would get us far, like showing up on more partisan shows, right, that are, like doing a primetime show versus a morning news show. I think all of these things would work to our benefit because the right is really good at lying and doing it very smoothly. And we come off clunky too often. And I think that allows people to continue to think that we're not on solid footing because it's all about your presentation, right? And it helps if the substance and the presentation are commingled and, that we can project that. So that's my little messaging note. But I also wanted to say that, there's reporting that there are some Republicans who are very nervous about the implications, not just on healthcare, but they're also watching farmers all over this country get absolutely thrashed by these tariffs. And Senator Thune is floating the idea of bailouts now for farmers, saying, well, we could take some of the revenue from the tariffs and use that as a bailout for the farmers. Now, you could have just not put the tariffs into place and the farmers would have been fine, right? We have like zero soybean exports now at this point. I think we got to be going really hard about this. And I take your point, like this shutdown is about healthcare. And we can win a midterms talking about healthcare, which is also an economic issue. But we should be commingling this conversation about what the tariffs are doing, specifically ravaging these rural communities. It's not just your hospitals that are shutting down. These farmers, I don't know if you've seen the footage, are showing up at town halls and losing their minds.
They're out of
about
business.
What's going on. Yeah, well, they will be. And they can't even afford the equipment that they need to be able to do the job if they had anyone to send their crops to anyway.
Yeah, but here's the bottom line. Most of these farms were non-economical without... There's this cartoon of the family farm, and everybody loves them, and agribusiness has been consolidated, and a lot of these farms make no economic sense. All subsidies do is create a certain lack of urgency for crop diversification or modernization. They just aren't competitive. And then with respect to the tariffs and a bailout, this is no different than the government starting a fire, lighting a house on fire, and then sending taxpayers the bill to put the fire out. Let me get this. We impose tariffs thinking that, we're so big and bad, no one will impose reciprocal tariffs. Not only has China imposed reciprocal tariffs, they've just said, we're no longer buying soybeans from you. And they've already established deep supply lines of soybeans from Argentina and Brazil. They're not coming back, folks.
Argentina, who we just bailed out. That was our thank you.
We can give $20 billion to Argentina This is the government showing up, shooting farmers in the leg, and then saying, oh, yeah, we didn't know it would cost money to heal your leg, and then sending taxpayers the bill. I mean, this is, and I realize this is a reductive, snarky statement, but I'm going to make it anyways. These farmers, the majority of whom voted for Trump, I love that billboard. Damn, we were voting for racism, not tariffs. So look, folks, you're the same voting bloc that thought a bailout of student loans was bad. You wanted Trump. Congratulations, here you are. And as hardcore capitalists, I agree with you. Bailouts are bad. Taxpayers get milked here, specifically younger people, because this isn't going to come from anything. It's going to be more debt. Consumers have to pay more because effectively any tariff now is essentially a tax on consumers. Farmers are just being put out of business. And what we're going to do is try and prop them up in the short term, in time for the midterms, and there'll be no structural advantage. They're going to be in the same. We might be able to bail them out for 6, 12, or maybe 18 months, but these farmers are no longer competitive, folks, and their biggest customer is not coming back. They're not coming back. They've reestablished new supply routes, which were pretty easy to switch. It ends up soybeans aren't that difficult to produce, and Argentinian and Brazilian farmland can make this shit really well as well. This is a case study in why tariffs don't work. They raise prices for consumers. They prop up industries that are not competitive, and they just increase taxes, increase debt, and a reduction in the prosperity of Americans. This is socialism meets oligarchy meets poor economic policy. And you're absolutely right. We should highlight. The government set the house on fire, and now they want to charge taxpayers to put out the fire. Let's take a quick break. Stay with us.
Timing victory.
There you go. Stay with us.